I know I'm a little late to the party, like 15 years or more too late to the party, but I'm glad to finally be watching one of the most widely enjoyed and influential anime of the past 20 years. And I expect this show to be an interesting look into typical human nature by way of some characters who are anything but typical, and with 4 episodes under my belt, I think it's time for the first review. Welcome to Death Notes, my notes on Death Note. And before I get started, I just want to remind everyone that I do have a Patreon now, and I know a lot of you are already members of the Patreon, but if you're not and you want to check it out, well, there is a link in the video description. I think the first take-home I have from what I've seen in these first 4 episodes, or at least what I'm inferring, whether or not it's an intentional implication by the creators, but what I'm seeing here is it looks like just perhaps boredom is the root of all evil in this Death Note world. It gets shown to us very, very clearly and very explicitly with Ryuk when he's in the Shinigami realm, because he's sitting around and he's bored and he needs to do something to break up the boredom and the monotony. So that's why he drops his Death Note to Earth in the first place, to the human realm in the first place. And then on the flip side of it, of all the people who could possibly find that Death Note, it just happens to be Light, a character who's like the top student in all of Japan, at least for his grade level, and he's clearly not being challenged by his schoolwork. He seems to have a big void in his own life, plenty of time to fill. I don't know if there's more to it than what we're seeing in these first 4 episodes, but it really looks like he's kind of a lonely guy. I don't see a whole lot of friends hanging around with Light. Maybe that's by choice. Maybe he is bored by his peers in school because they're just not on his intellectual level. But boredom is really what seems like it could be the root of all evil in this world. And as we'll get into this world, this anime does really like to show us some allusions to religion. I would say Christianity in particular, or Judeo-Christianity. So I do think that having something represent the root of all evil just might actually track with what this show's doing. But as Light starts using this Death Note that he's found and he starts putting people's names in it, he really kicks it into high gear. I mean, he's filling up some serious space. He's taking up some serious paper real estate when he starts using this Death Note. And when you look at it, it's just a relatively normal-sized or regular-sized composition notebook. It's not very thick at all. And I start to wonder, like, what happens if Light runs out of pages? Like, what if the Death Note runs out of pages? I mean, we see he even rips a page out of the Death Note at one point to use in part of one of his plans. And I want to know what happens if every page in the Death Note gets full. Part of me suspects that there's probably a supernatural fail-safe along those lines, like there's always a blank page at the front and the oldest page just kind of evaporates and it gets replaced with a new blank page. I think there might be some reason that the Death Note never actually gets full, even though it doesn't increase in size. I don't know. But as he's really using up a lot of space and as he gets more intricate with the details that he puts in there about the deaths and just looking at the relative small size of this Death Note, that is something that is going to have to be addressed pretty soon, I think, is what happens if the Death Note gets full or starts to run out of pages, or more likely, what kind of mechanism is in place to keep it from running out of space and to keep it from running out of pages. Or could it be, unbeknownst to Light, once the Death Note is full, he himself is the last name that just appears in the Death Note, you know? Maybe Ryuk writes it in there and then that's all she wrote for poor sweet Light. And by the way, I say poor sweet Light with tongue firmly in cheek. I'm being a little cheeky there. One interesting thing, though, that the show does give us, at least the way that I see it, my perspective through my eyes, is it gives us a pretty good story of dueling narcissism, at least in these first 4 episodes, because we see the juxtaposition, we see the face-off. You know, they even give us a nice split screen where we see Light and this character L kind of virtually screaming at one another, and they put their faces in close proximity. And these two guys really do seem cocky. These two guys really do seem confident that they are the smartest, each one believing he's smarter than the other. Both of them, I think, giving me the idea that they're enjoying this challenge, or at least this chance for one to flex on the other one. But at the end, it really comes across to me as dueling narcissism between two narcissists who really are maybe doing needlessly elaborate things, maybe taking needless risks just to show how capable and competent they are, like trying to one-up one another, maybe impress their adversary at the same time they try to bring them down. But I do like that dynamic. You know, at one point, When Ryuk says he's on nobody's side, I can understand why as we see these two battling. But I also understand I'm only 4 episodes in. So as more episodes come out, my understanding of these characters may evolve. I may take a different point of view on it. But right now it seems like a battle of dueling narcissists. And also kind of building off of that idea, Light sort of shows us that you don't have to be a hero to be a protagonist. And this is something I talked about a little bit when I was analyzing the Crunchyroll Anime Awards, where Eren had been nominated for Best Antagonist and Best Protagonist. And I think it was somebody who actually pointed this out to me in the comments, and it was just so good I had to kind of swipe that comment and use it. But you don't have to be a good guy to be a protagonist. Or maybe you can say you don't have to be a good guy to sort of be the hero of the story, because Light is clearly our point of view character in these first 4 episodes. Light is also clearly a psychopath. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's a bad psychopath. Does that sound absurd when I'm saying he might be a good psychopath? I mean, we kind of have had stories where we relate to the psychopath. I think it's a pretty sound argument to be made that Batman is a psychopath. Hannibal Lecter, definitely a psychopath who has been the hero of some stories. And then also, a more baseline definition of protagonist. It's the one who's trying to affect change in a story. It's the character who moves the story forward, and you definitely don't have to be a hero or be a good guy to be the protagonist. And we're seeing this, like I said, from Light's point of view. Light, definitely not a good guy, but I find myself, it's hard not to kind of relate to him just because you're put in the room with Light for so much of the story. And then something that caught my attention in the first episode, if you watch my reaction, I mentioned it right on the spot. There's a really, really recurring theme between Ryuk and apples. And apples show up a lot. And it's really noticeable because the bright red apple has this rich contrast against the black and the gray coloration of Ryuk. So when he eats it, it makes a stunning image. And that contrast, that image in an animated series might be enough reason to put that there. But it also has heavily implied religious significance or religious allusions with an A, not an I. It alludes, not illusion. But anyway, it's not uncommon for art to depict the fruit of the tree of knowledge from the Garden of Eden as an apple. Of course, Adam and Eve, they ate from that tree of knowledge. Let's just say that their ignorance was lifted from them. Their eyes were opened to the true nature of the world and the true nature of life. And in exchange for having this knowledge, they were afflicted with the human condition, mortality, illness, you get cold when it's cold, you get hot when it's hot, you got to eat or else you get hungry. Life is suffering, kind of a Buddhist principle there. And this is all introduced in the story of the Garden of Eden from that fruit of the tree of knowledge. And to have Ryuk eating that apple, because in this story, you almost think that Light receiving the Death Note, well, that might be the analog to the, the original sin, the fall of man, whatever. I'm not a theologist here. But instead, with Ryuk eating the apple, I wonder if the actual interesting change is going to be in the Shinigami realm, if the actual interesting change is going to be in Ryuk. Like, he's eating this apple, he's taking this bite that's opening his eyes to possibilities of some sort, but those possibilities are probably going to introduce hardships. So are more Shinigami going to come to the human realm following in Ryuk's footsteps? As he, there is something where Light says, hey, you see what I'm doing here in the human realm? You could go back and do this in the Shinigami realm. So is there going to be some conflict in the Shinigami? Is Ryuk going to go back and try to recreate the Shinigami realm? I don't know. Once again, it might just be a cool visual effect. I don't quite understand the role of Judeo-Christian religion in Japan, what the local maybe attitudes are about it, or sort of the approach towards it. I imagine it might be very different there than it is, in North America. So there might just be a sense of otherness that it's put in there to make it feel kind of spooky or foreign. I don't know, but I am kind of curious what's going here. In the Death Note, the T's, the letter T's in like the logo for Death Note look like crosses. Sometimes they look like Celtic crosses. But of course, crosses have that Christianity kind of feel to them. It's a common imagery in Christianity. So I'm just kind of wondering what they're going for. Does the Death Note kind of look like a New Testament? Maybe not the whole Bible, but the New Testament. Definitely the cover with the black cover and things. I don't know. I'm curious. I don't have a real good formed theory to go along with this. These are just things I've observed in the first 4 episodes. So I'm going to be looking for how this theme might relate back to Ryuk, might relate back to the story, or it might just be there because it seems cool and creepy in the eyes of the people who created the anime and the manga, of course. Also, going along with this idea that maybe the Christian themes or the religious kind of underlying tones that show up from time to time in the story, I had one idea that maybe it's just to add a sense of mystery to it, a sense of otherness. And something else that I think might be along those same lines is the frequent use of the letter L in character names. I mean, we have a character named L. We have a character named Light. And of course, phonetically, that phonic, that L phonic, is not one that occurs very commonly in native Japanese. You know, native Japanese speakers don't necessarily use that phonic very often. So those names, like Light, I think is pronounced Raito, and L is Eru. But those names maybe are there to give it a foreign feeling, or to give it a feeling of otherness, to let the people watching or reading or enjoying the story feel sort of a little bit disoriented, or like there's something different or strange here. Also, you know, Kira, the nickname, or not really the nickname, just the name that is given to Light by the people who don't know who he is, but who do believe that there's this entity killing evil people. Well, Kira is like, I don't know what the word is. Like, I know you can anglicize a foreign word, but what's the opposite of that? When you take an English word, I don't know, Nipponicized or Japonification. I don't know. I don't want to use the wrong word and offend anybody, but it's like Kira is taking the word killer and giving it a pronunciation that fits the phonics of the Japanese language a little bit better. So all of this letter L coming up so much, and then the big letter L that's prominent on the computer screen whenever L is talking, or Eru. I think all of this is just to give it a feeling of strange, a feeling of otherness, to give it an international feel. Like the Death Note itself, the instructions are written in English, which in the story, Ryuk says it's because English is the most widely spoken language in the world. Maybe the writer actually thought that was true. I'm not sure that's true. I know it's definitely prominent, but I'm not sure it's the most widely spoken language in the world. I'm also not sure it's not. I'm not trying to make an argument one way or the other. But I kind of wonder if a little bit of that is because the Western religion that is used here, then the English language maybe fits in with that in the mind of the writer at the time that the manga was being written. And then it also adds that sense of otherness. And maybe there was also just like a hope that this story, both the manga and the anime, would find a Western audience, probably more specifically a North American audience, because there's a lot of population and advertising dollars to be made there. Just speculating, but there is this big sense of otherness. This whole story feels otherworldly, from opening in the Shinigami realm to using maybe religious themes and phonetics that aren't as common in Japan. So I do like the way that it's trying to get everybody to feel just a little off-center, just a little unsteady as they're watching the show. Also adding to that sort of eerie sense of otherness is this ambient score. And I'm not just talking about like the musical notes, but I mean there are just sort of like little sort of sounds of crackling noises that'll come across while you're watching a scene. There are these sounds like dripping water, these atonal sounds that come along that aren't music, but they're just ambient sounds that don't necessarily fit the scene, but they're to give you a little bit of a certain feeling, to set a tone, I think, internally, sometimes to have you feel a little bit uncomfortable. I would describe them, like I said, as atonal, sometimes cacophonous, sometimes a little uncomfortable, definitely not musical in the traditional sense, but it does have a whole lot of that pops up just again to give this an otherworldly feeling, an uncomfortable feeling. Just, it's not the sort of thing you're going to slip into a very comfortable groove and then kind of lose track of what's going on. They really do want to keep people just a little bit on edge with the way this is created from top to bottom, in my opinion, front to back, beginning to end. In this kind of metaphorical chess match between Light and L, I think it has to be difficult to write. These kind of things always feel to me like they're very difficult to write, because you want to write the world's smartest person or the world's most gifted and brilliant detective, but there comes a point where it's difficult for you to write a superhuman thought process when you're limited to using your actual real human mind. So that can be very challenging. So I do think this high-level chess match between Light and L has to be difficult to write, but of course, I'm sure it went through many drafts before we got the manga and then again before we got the anime, but it does keep me engaged because I do want to see what's going to happen. Considering the high level of intellect that both Light and L are supposed to have, or at least we're told that they have through the events of the story, it does seem to me like a couple of times they fall for some things that are pretty transparent. Most egregiously to me, the one that seemed most obvious to me, was the fact that the person who went on the news and claimed to be L, that he was a decoy. I think that was pretty easy to spot coming, and I am definitely not the most brilliant mind in the world. I am not the top student in Japan. I am not a police detective. But, you know, it's pretty easy to tell that was a trap, or at least a trick, even if you don't call it a trap. But it did turn out to be a trap. But Light, I don't know if maybe he lets his emotion or his rage get to him, but he just goes straight for it. He falls for it. Doesn't see through what's going on there. Also, he wanted the person, the individual, to die so immediately, or maybe he just didn't even think it through, that he didn't even like time it to give him a little bit of cover or add a little question or mystery to it. And then also, I kind of feel like when L sends the FBI agent to follow Light, that he should have been able to see that Light could handle that, and that Light would figure out what's going on there. I do feel like L should be better at figuring out who Light is than he seems to be so far, because he has picked up on a whole lot of clues that point him that direction. But still, all that aside, we're only 4 episodes in. They can't have it all come to a head right away, correct? So they got to keep this cat and mouse game going for a little while. But all that aside, it does keep me engaged. I'm always enjoying to look at what happens next, and maybe it gives it more of a feeling of reality or verisimilitude, that they do occasionally fall for dumb stuff and then they recover and they're smart again. Because there are days when I do dumb stuff and days when I'm real proud of the things I do. So that might just be a little more truth in human nature there. And I do like this cult of Kira that builds up around Light, or around Light's actions, or around the legend that Light has built. I also like it because it gives us a nice look at what the internet used to be like in 2005, 2006, 15, 16 years ago, what have you. Because it's changed a little bit since then. I think there was much more of a boldness of anonymity. There were people that would sometimes go a little bit more haywire. It seemed like maybe the more fringe elements were a little bit more present there than they are now. Social media was actually still kind of nascent back then. So I do like seeing this cult of Kira that builds up on an older style internet. I do think it's interesting to see the people rooting for the murderer, rooting for the serial killer. And it's a serial killer who kills serial killers, that kind of Dexter scenario. But I do enjoy the little flashback to reminding me exactly what the internet used to be like and seeing how it's portrayed and dealt with here in the show. But as Light does put criminals in his Death Note, I start to have this real sort of diversity of my feeling about it. Because when he's stopping crimes in progress, I'm absolutely cheering for him like a demented superhero. Like he's the demon that kills those who deserve to die, like some, I don't know, a horror comic, like the way Man-Thing or Swamp Thing kind of were depicted originally. But when there are people that are already caught and they're already in prison and they're already on death row and he's killing them just to experiment with how the Death Note works and to see exactly how he can use it and to practice, for lack of a better word, well, I don't get very excited about that. I feel like he's not really accomplishing anything there. I also feel like that is more feeding his own ego than actually accomplishing what he claims he wants to do, which is to build a better world. You're not really affecting much change when you're just practicing by killing people who are already in prison. But when we've got the biker gang or the scooter gang, whatever they are, that are assaulting the woman outside of a convenience store, and we see Light use the Death Note to kill one of those guys and by extension save that girl, or young woman, I should say, well, it's pretty cool then. Right? Then it's easy to cheer for him. When we see the escaped convict who takes the bus hostage, it's easy to cheer for him. But then again, would he have taken the bus hostage if not for the Death Note? Probably not, but he probably would have done something else bad. But it's strange, this duality of feeling and opinion I get when it's a crime in process or in progress that we see Light standing up against versus just these cooped up, caged up people that are like shooting fish in a barrel. And then, I have to talk a little bit about Light's stated goal, which is to get rid of the evil in the world, right? Like to remake the world in his own image. I don't know, but to remake the world where he gets rid of all the evil, in theory, Except for him, he would be the only evil left, because I don't think it's hard at all to argue that there's definitely an evil streak in Light. But the problem is, evil abhors a vacuum. You know, I've heard people say nature abhors a vacuum. Well, evil abhors a vacuum. So there's always new evil bubbling up to fill in the space that is left vacant when old evil is taken away. Somebody in the comments said a great analogy to describe evil. Somebody in the comments said evil is like dust. You know, every day you clean off the dust, the next day more dust appears. So I think it's a pretty interesting idea that he wants to get rid of all the evil, but I kind of have this idea that that's sort of a fool's errand. Evil is something you manage, not something you eliminate. Probably going to be pretty frustrating to him. Also, you tend to expand your definition of evil. Like, evil is relative. Like, what might be considered evil in present day would be different than what is considered evil in a utopia. You know, we certainly treat littering different than murder right now. But maybe if littering is the only crime that's out there, then suddenly littering is really, not that it's a good thing, but you know, it's different than murder. So I just wonder if suddenly things that right now are kind of tolerated, like, oh, you sneezed in public, death sentence. Like, I don't know, maybe that'll trigger people. I shouldn't have talked about sneezing, but you understand, like, what might not even seem like a bad thing at all now could seem really, really evil if you have a certain shift in one direction or the other, this Overton window that perhaps Light is introducing into the world. And then another great concept that gets introduced, and I don't know if it's a thought that I had spontaneously on my own or if the show actually shows it, but when Light gets this deal, or he gets this opportunity in the episode Dealings, episode 3, when he is offered the chance or the possibility to have a Shinigami's eyes, and then he says something about, you should have offered me your wings, maybe I would have taken that. Then I start to think, like, could a human become a Shinigami? Because if a human could have a Shinigami's eyes, could a human get Shinigami parts one at a time until the human becomes a Shinigami? Is that where Shinigami come from? Like, I don't know the origin story of Shinigami, so is it possible? And Ryuk kind of suggests that it's not, but I don't know if we can trust Ryuk at face value on that, but I got this real kind of curious thought process and thought, wouldn't it be interesting if Light becomes a Shinigami from his experience with the Death Note, or is this the place that Shinigami come from? Because I am interested in learning more about the show's Shinigami lore. We see the Shinigami realm, which I don't quite understand where that exists. I get the idea it's a metaphysical realm and not a physical realm. But I also know there are multiple Shinigami, and I would like to see more Shinigami perhaps enter this story like I suspect they will. I'd like to see a little bit about the politics of the Shinigami realm. I would like to see where Shinigami come from, how they're made. Do they start as humans and through some process become Shinigami? Or do they start as something else? Do they start as Shinigami and through some process become human? I don't know, but I'm really curious to hear about the show's Shinigami lore, because I know I could just read established Shinigami lore, and I probably will do that at some point to compare and contrast, but usually most fictional stories, most fictional universes, they create their own lore that relates to our real world lore, but usually have their own twists, and I'm curious to see what the show does with the Shinigami lore. And I do like the idea that they're using this small world storytelling. And what I mean by small world is so many characters can be interconnected. And specifically, I like it that Light's father is a police captain, or, you know, something along those lines. He's part of this task force, the task force that has the task of finding Kira. Well, his father is one of the leadership members of that task force. I think it's great. Some people don't like stories where it just seems a little too convenient for everything to be interconnected. They don't like it when the world feels too small. But I really enjoy this because it's something you don't see coming, and when it does come, it seems kind of awesome. It really caught me off guard, and I loved it. I savored it. Plus, it explains how Light can get access to information that he's going to need to play this chess match with L. But in accessing that information, the very fact that he knows what he knows, Light is giving L a clue to the fact that Light is in some way adjacent to the police force there in Tokyo. So I really like this. I like the idea that his father is the police captain. It's a nice, tightly wound up little world that gets very intriguing. A lot of fun there. I don't want to spoil too many movies, but I love it when it pops up in movies, and it does pop up in superhero movies from time to time. And I also like the way that Light is using the very idea that L can tell he's adjacent to the police force to sort of turn it against L, and more significantly turn it against the police force, because he has this theory that he's going to manipulate the police force into finding out who L is instead of finding out who Light is. And this whole theory of setting L against the police force and getting them against each other is built on Light's assumption that the basic default state of human nature is distrust, or at least limited trust. They trust a very, very small amount of people, they being humans, which I guess I could say we, I'm human, last time I checked, who knows, that's up for debate. But anyway, he takes the thesis statement, the premise that the default state of humans is distrust. So even though L and the police are supposed to be working together, he does believe he can just twist a few little knobs, push a few little buttons, and get the police and L working against one another. The police will discover who L is, then he will use their discovery so that he can target L. I like that. But I also like the idea that he's using a basic assumption that isn't necessarily a universal truth. So there is a way perhaps for the story to say that he's wrong here, or to reinforce just how correct he is. We just have to watch everything unfold. And I also really like it that Ryuk is not on anybody's side. He's just there to stir the pot, just there to make this story interesting. He's there for a good time, not a long time, because he doesn't care how long Light manages to last with this Death Note. And it is really enjoyable to have this observer. And it's such a horrific observer. Like, I love the character design, which I've said many, many times. It's fun to see him just hanging out. It gives it a ghost story feel because no one but Light so far can see him. And I do like that. And I like it because I kind of feel like Ryuk here. I don't know who's good and who's bad. I don't know if there is a good and a bad. I'm just here to watch that pot get stirred and see what happens. I do also sort of like the way that Light systematically explores the boundaries of the Death Note. Like, he takes kind of a scientific approach and he uses sort of case control and he says, can it do this? Can it do that? He quantifies what it can and can't do. So before he is creating plans that he really, really has to rely on, he has some evidence-based knowledge about what the Death Note can and can't do. I really enjoy that. That's a great way to express to the viewer that Light is indeed an intellectual person, an intelligent person, is the way he designs his experiments, kind of uses, you could sort of say, sort of the scientific method there. Also makes me wonder if the original manga writer had some experience in academia or in science, the way that they do take the systematic approach. I had a lot of fun with that. And I know Light claims he wants to get rid of evil in the world and to build a better world, but he does seem awfully quick to jump to the conclusion that he needs to kill his stalker. Like, he does not hesitate once Ryuk tells him that he's being followed by who I think Light can assume as a police officer, that this police officer is trying to figure out what he's up to or who he is, and he immediately wants to kill the police officer. And I would argue the police officer is not doing anything evil by doing his job by following Light, but it shows some of Light's own selfishness and own pathos and pathology coming through in his alleged goal of building a better, safer, less evil world when he's so quick to want to do this evil thing. And of course, I alluded before to this deal that Ryuk offers to give Light Shinigami eyes, which would be very powerful for him with that Death Note, because the Shinigami eyes let you know the name and identity of anyone you see, so you can immediately put their name in the Death Note if you want to. So he could really use this to amp up his Death Note abilities. However, nothing comes without its price, and you have to give half of the remaining years of your life to get this power. I was really worried he was going to take it, because I think it's a bum deal. I don't think it's worth it to have those Shinigami eyes to lose half the remaining years of your life. I imagine it would depend on how old you are, because like, if you're 16, 17, whatever Light is here, and you imagine you've got 60 years left, well, you give up half, you still got 30 years left. You're 60 and you got 20 years left, cutting that down to 10 might be a harder deal. I don't know, but I'm glad he didn't take the deal. I think it was a sucker's deal. I think it's one of those deals that are made just to trick you in the first place. And we also noticed that Ryuk has 2 Death Notes, and I don't know why. Like, I don't know how this happened. Do all the Shinigami have 2 Death Notes? Or did Ryuk kind of run some kind of scam where he claimed he lost his first Death Note because he dropped it to Earth and then he got the second one? Or is it the second one that he dropped to Earth? I don't know, but I do wonder, like, how long is it going to be until Ryuk, who says he's just there to stir the pot, just there to watch the action, how long until he decides, okay, this is getting too predictable, I'm going to give this second Death Note to a second person and really spice things up in the world? Is that going to happen? I don't know, but I'm kind of curious. Like I said, I want to learn more about the show Shinigami lore. I want to learn why exactly Ryuk has 2 Death Notes in the first place. And we do get a little bit of Shinigami lore when Ryuk's talking about how the Death Note works. When they kill people, when the Shinigami put a person's name in the Death Note. I shouldn't say when they kill people, because that's not exactly what's going on here. But when the Shinigami take a person's life by putting their name in the Death Note, the remaining years of that person's natural life get added to the Shinigami, so they have to keep putting names in their Death Note in order to ensure their own immortality. So I like it that they're not actually serving a function or a virtue, because you would think of something as like the Angel of Death or the Grim Reaper as serving a purpose, because if humans live forever, then the world just couldn't handle it and all, something like that. You know, think of it as like bacteria that help decompose dead matter, like plant and animal matter. They're serving a purpose and, you know, putting it back into the soil. But no, there doesn't seem to be any grander virtue behind the Shinigami's motivation. They just are worried because they don't want their existence to end, so they keep putting names in those Death Notes so they can be just as warped as Light, which once again makes me think Light might not make a bad Shinigami. And of course, the episode on the bus really plays out nicely. In episode 4, we get to see Light fully flex the capabilities of the Death Note. We get to see a more complicated death laid out in the Death Note. We get to see it play out, and it's really interesting. We also get to see like a little bit of the story of how this escaped prisoner came under the influence of the Death Note, because we get a little flashback once it all comes to a head in episode 4. And I also found it really, really clever the way that Light was able to reveal Ryuk to the hijacker, like he wrote on a sheet of paper from the Death Note, because anyone who touches the Death Note can see Ryuk. But I didn't think about the idea that a wad of paper ripped from the Death Note would count as part of the Death Note. So he drops it, or he acts like he's writing a note to pass to somebody. Of course, the hijacker, curiosity killed the cat kind of situation. He comes around, he grabs it, unfolds it. Once he touches it, he's able to see Ryuk. He freaks out, leads to his own death, flees from the bus, gets hit by a truck or something like that. Great to see that play out. Also great to see the way that Light can envision the way things will unfold and create a very specific and effective scenario and then help lead to it playing out. Pretty good, very enjoyable. And then the last thing I want to talk about is 40 seconds. You write someone's name in the Death Note, they have a heart attack in 40 seconds unless you give more information. And then you have 6 minutes and 40 seconds to give more information if that's what you're going to do. So I know I'm simplifying that, but we have 2 periods of time, 40 seconds and 6 minutes and 40 seconds. And there's been some discussion about what is significant about those. Here's what I'm going to say. We're using some sort of Judeo-Christian religious themes all through this. The apples, the crosses for T's, the Celtic crosses for T's. Well, 40 seconds is 2/3 of a minute. And 2/3 is 0.67. That's how most people would write it down, is 0.67. But it's actually 0.6 repeating, which is 0.666666666. So if you take it out to 3 spots and you don't round up, 40 seconds is 0.666 minutes. And of course, 666, the mark of the beast, it has some sinister connotations in Judeo-Christian religion and theology. And of course, you can say it's related to death. You can say that maybe something here with what the Shinigami are doing is intimidating, and that 666, the mark of the beast, maybe goes along with that. And then 6 minutes and 40 seconds, well, that's 6.66 seconds. So again, you got that 666. Just me throwing it out there. Plenty of more pure mathematicians could argue you have to round it up to 0.667. But if it's 0.666 repeating, I think there is a frame of reference, a point of view where someone could look at it and squint enough and say, yes, that's 666. Just putting that out there. Maybe it's an old theory. Maybe it's something that's already been talked about, already been either debunked or supported. But that's just kind of what I see as the significance of 40 seconds, as well as 6 minutes and 40 seconds. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up. I wound up going a little bit longer than I planned to on this review, but I'm proud of you for watching anime, and I'll talk to you again soon. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. It really means a lot to me. If you might be interested in Patreon perks like early access to videos, uncut reaction videos, ad-free videos, and the opportunity to vote on which anime will be covered in the future, then click on the link in the video description. Thank you.